We're in First Samuel chapters 9 and 10 today. That's 2 chapters. That means we're going to be going at a pretty good pace today. When I'm preaching long narrative sections like this, there's going to be some summarizing. And so what I summarize is God's Word. You will be edified by going back and reading that as you have time, but it would be difficult to read every word and get the sermon out at the same time. 1 Samuel chapter 9 follows 1 Samuel chapter 8. That's surprising for those of you who don't understand how numbers work. And in 1 Samuel chapter 8, the people of Israel were asking for a king. They went to Samuel. They said, look, your sons are no good. We want a king. And God says, you know what, Samuel? Give them what they want. The king will be a bad king, but it's what they want. Give them a king. And so he sends them away. And in 1 Samuel chapter 9, we meet that king. Let's read 1 Samuel chapter 9, starting in verse 1. It says, there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, son of Zeror, son of Bechereth, son of Ephiah, a Benjaminite, a man of wealth. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. Our introduction to Saul, the first king of Israel, is pretty interesting. He basically is the guy to look like a king. When it says he was taller than everyone from the shoulders upward, it doesn't mean that he had a very long neck. Right? What it means is when he walked into the room, everyone else came to his shoulders, and he was a head above everyone else. You would just look around and be like, oh, there he is. Like whenever we got Seth in our house, and he's walking around, oh, there's Seth. It's easy to find. He goes before us in like a, Disney World or whatever, and it's like we can just follow Seth. He's like a beacon up there that's 6'6". We can just follow him up there, right? And so Saul was that guy. He was a head taller than everyone else. He was a handsome man. He was a man that came from a family of wealth. All of these things were things that God gave to Saul, right? God gave Saul to be in a family that he had blessed financially. God gave Saul good looks for that day and age. God gave Saul the height and the build that he had. He was a man who looked the part of a king. He looked like a man who could be king. And so they would just go out and be like, man, that guy might be something special. In my last church, my pastor, Woody Woodward, would meet the visitors in the church, and he carried a 3x5 index card in his pocket. And when he would meet a visitor, he would talk to them and engage with them, and then he would turn away from them, and he would pull the card out, and he would write down notes about the people. Their names, where they were from, whatever information he could get on a little note card about them, and he'd put it back in his pocket. And then next week, if the person came back, he'd pull the note card out as he saw them across the room, refresh his mind about who they were, and be like, oh, how are things at Exxon, right? And he would have a way to begin the discussion again. He was very good at this. And he would come into our staff meetings every Monday or Tuesday, and he would write on the staff agenda his notes about the people that came. And the notes were typically, where they were from and how many kids they had and things like that. And one day there was a note in there, and it was whatever the guy's name was, Joe Smith or whatever, and his wife's name, and then it just said TDH and then something else. And we said, hey, Woody, what does TDH mean? And he says, tall, dark, and handsome. Right? And so whatever this guy was, whatever this guy had, Woody looked at him and was like, now there is a good-looking man. Right? And so he just made note of it because he knew if he saw that guy again, he'd be like, oh, that's the tall, dark, and handsome man. Saul was that man. When he walked into a room, everyone looked at him and was like, that's a good-looking dude. Right? And all of this was God's doing, right? This is an interesting thing that God had prepared Saul to be king. Right? God had made Saul specifically to be king, and God has shaped you specifically for your purpose in life. Now, you may not be a TDH. You may be SP and U. You may be short, pale, and ugly, okay? Right? That may be what you are. You may be like, man, I'm not tall, dark, and handsome. I'm short, pale, and ugly. That's okay. God has made you. He has shaped you specifically for the purpose that you are to fulfill. And I want you to know that you have a very specific purpose in God's kingdom, a purpose that I cannot accomplish, right? It doesn't matter how much book learning that someone may have or how much charisma someone may have. You were made the way that you were made by the God of the universe who knew all things to prepare you for this moment. Someone in my Sunday school class said, I don't believe in things just happening and coincidences, and it's true. Coincidences biblically are hard to understand because we have a God who is sovereign over all things, and he providentially makes things happen. It is not an accident that you look the way you look, that you think the way that you think, that you're gifted the way that you're gifted, that you've experienced the things that you've experienced in your life. It's not an accident that you're in this room at this time to hear this message, right? The God of the universe has sovereignly arranged all of these things in your life, has made you the way that he's made you, right? For his purposes. And if you're a child of God, if you've been adopted into the family of God by faith, those purposes, right, are to somehow fulfill the Great Commission in your little window. And no one can replace you. No one can replace you. And so God, just like God made Saul for a specific purpose and a specific shape to look like a king, God has made you for a specific purpose. He has shaped you for a specific purpose. And we would do well to understand what that is. If you got the little kids thing today, the back of that, I took the little coloring section away, much to the chagrin of Calvin Price. Right? Now, usually I put, sometimes, not even usually, about half the time, I put a little square in there that they can draw a picture in on it. On the back this time, I have just a ton of words and questions, which are not appealing to the 4- and 5-year-old mind. But what it is it's questions about how you're shaped. What are your spiritual gifts? What are your passions? What are your special abilities? What are your experiences? What is it about your personality that makes you you? Because if you can begin to understand all those little pieces that have shaped you, right, you can begin to see how you fit into God's puzzle for what your purpose in life is going to be. Right? And so if you got that, just take some time, think through those things. But God shapes people for his purpose. Saul was shaped for the purpose to be the first king of Israel. God knew the people would reject Samuel and his children. God knew that the people would reject his leadership. God had prepared for this from the beginning, and he made Saul long before to be the man to take that mantle. God is in charge of all of these things. And so Saul is introduced to us as this guy. Saul's dad loses some donkeys, and so Saul is out looking for the donkeys. That's the rest of the next little section here. He's out looking for the donkeys, and he's wandering from here to there to here to there. And for days, he's on search for these donkeys. He has a servant of his family with him, and they're just wandering all over trying to find these lost donkeys. Saul realizes that he's been gone a little while, and he says, look, my dad is eventually going to stop worrying about these donkeys and start worrying about me. We should probably go back home. The servant says, look, I know that there's a prophet, a seer that lives in, or sometimes in this city that we're near, this city of Zuph. Great name. And so if we just go there, maybe the seer will be in, the prophet will be in. This is going to be Samuel. And we can go and we can see this seer. So he goes to the city area right outside of it where there's a well. There's a woman getting water from the well. And he says, hey, is the seer in today? And she's like, actually, he's just in there right now. He's going up to have dinner, have a big banquet in the high place. If you go in, you'll be able to find him right now. Verse 15, read with me. It says, now the day before Saul came, so the day before he made it to Zuph, the Lord had revealed to Samuel, the prophet, tomorrow about this time, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you will anoint him to be prince over my people Israel. He shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines, for I have seen my people, because their cry has come to me. And when Samuel saw Saul, man, that's hard on me, the Lord told him, here is the man of whom I spoke to you. He it is who shall restrain my people. Then Saul approached Samuel in the gate and said, tell me, where is the house of the seer? And Samuel answered, I am the seer. Go up before me to the high place, for today you shall eat with me, and in the morning I will let you go and tell you all that is on your mind. As for the donkeys that were lost 3 days ago, do not set your mind on them, for they have been found. And for whom is all that is desirable in Israel? Is it not for you and for all your father's house? And Saul answered, am I not a Benjaminite from the clan, from the least of the tribes of Israel? And is not my clan the humblest of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why then have you spoken to me in this way? Right? And if we don't have biblically facing eyes, we would see this as very coincidental. Saul just happens to walk to the city where the seer was. The seer just happens to be Samuel, who's going to anoint a king. He just happens to be the first person he meets when he goes into the town. But God was arranging all of these things to set him up. And so Saul meets Samuel, and he says, hey, is the prophet in? And he's like, yes, I'm right here. And he's like, oh, okay. And he's like, you're going to go eat with me today. And he's like, well, that's weird. The prophet's inviting me to eat. I was just wanting to ask about some. And he's like, oh, those donkeys are fine. And he's like, I didn't even ask about the donkeys yet. Right? And he's like, okay. He's like, the donkeys are fine. And then Samuel does this weird twist on Saul. And he's like, and these are these questions. He says, and for whom is all that is desirable in Israel? And basically he says like you are the most desired man in all of Israel. And Saul's like, I think you must have your wires crossed. It's like, I'm just Saul from the smallest tribe. Benjamin's a little bitty tribe. I'm from the smallest of the tribes. And my family is the least important of all the families in the tribe. I'm not that guy. But see, God had already told Samuel that Saul was the guy. So when he saw him and God said, that's the one, he knew. That is the man. And God put Samuel in his life, in Saul's life, to call out of Saul something that God had already put in Saul. When I surrendered to the ministry, I was 18 years old. It was Senior Recognition Sunday at First Baptist Church, Sugar Land. I remember it very, very well. And I had been wrestling with this from the time that I got saved. I got saved when I was 15 years old. And it was pretty much immediately that I began doing this back and forth with God about whether or not I would surrender to the ministry. And that's a difficult decision to make because you don't know what's you coming out, this desire for pride or some spiritual significance, right? Where is that stop and where is it actually God's leadership in your life? And so for 3 years, I wrestled with this, had various conversations with people about this. And then it just kind of became clear to me that this was what I was going to do. And so I walked the aisle, just like you have an opportunity to do at the end of every service here. I walked the aisle, and I went to my pastor, and he said, I know what this is about, Matt. And I was like, how do you know? Because I'm a guy who frequently, previous to my salvation, walked the aisle about 1,000 times to rededicate my life. That wasn't great. And so I wasn't the first timer to ever come down the aisle, and he's like, I know what this is about. And he told me, he said, you're surrendering to the ministry. I said, I am. And it was in that moment, all of a sudden, that thing that was in me, became bolstered a little bit. I was like, oh, he's calling this out of me. I see this. And then I sat down on the front row of chairs. And the man who became my father-in-law, I was dating his daughter at this time. He had known me before I was a Christian. He had known me from about 4th grade on. He began to know me real well as I'd been dating Danielle. He was the man who came down and did kind of the counseling with me. And so he came down to me, and I remember he said, I know what this is about, Matt. And I thought, what the heck? He's like, you're surrendering to the ministry. I said, I am. A couple weeks later, I met with my youth minister who had been promoted or moved over to an executive pastor position. And he said, Matt, I have seen this call on your life for years. I just didn't want to put it on you. I wanted it to come out of you. And all three of these men, my father-in-law, my pastor, and my youth minister, who knew me well, right, saw in me the thing that I had been wrestling with for a long time. God puts people in your life to call you things out of you sometimes, to call you to greater service. Right? He puts people, places people in our lives to call us to greater service. And you don't always know what that is. And someone will come to you and say, hey, why don't you do this? And immediately your response is, oh, I don't think I should be the one to do that. No, I think I'm not the one. It shouldn't be me. Like Samuel's like, you're the person everyone wants. And Israel's like, look, I think you got the wrong guy. I'm not that guy. But God puts people in your life sometimes to call things out of you that you've been struggling with, right? To give you a nudge and a prod to go do the thing that God has made you to do. And so God puts people, providentially places people in our lives to call things out of us, to call us to greater service. Samuel was that man to call Saul to greater service. Samuel goes up, has the feast with Saul, eats. Saul gets the best food, like Samuel had set food aside earlier in the day for this guy who was going to show up. So he gets like the leg bone. Apparently that's good. I don't know, right? So he gets the best of the food. He eats in a position of prominence among all the people at the table. And then he goes to bed and he wakes up and he's about to head out. And we pick up in chapter 10, verse 1. It says, then Samuel took a flask of oil and he poured it on his head. That's on Saul's head. And he kissed him and he said, has not the Lord anointed you to be prince over his people? And you shall reign over the people of the Lord, and you will save them from the hand of their surrounding enemies. And this shall be a sign to you that the Lord has anointed you to be prince over his heritage. When you depart from me today, you'll meet 2 men by Rachel's tomb in the territory of Benjamin at Zelzah. And they'll say to you, the donkeys that you went to seek are found, and your father has ceased to care about the donkeys and is now anxious about you, saying, what shall I do about my son? And then you shall go from there farther and come to the oak of Tabor. And 3 men going up to God at Bethel will meet you there. One will be carrying 3 young goats, another carrying 3 loaves of bread, and another carrying a skin of wine. And they will greet you and give you 2 loaves of bread, which you will accept from their hand. And after that you shall come to Gibeath Elohim, where there's a garrison of the Philistines, and there, as soon as you come to the city, you'll meet a group of prophets coming down from the high place with harp, tambourine, flute, and lyre before them prophesying. And then the Spirit of the Lord will rush upon you, and you will prophesy with them and be turned into another man. Now, when these signs meet you, do what your hand finds to do, for God is with you. And then go down before me to Gilgal, and behold, I am going to come down to you to offer burnt offerings and to sacrifice peace offerings. 7 days you'll wait until I come to you and show you what you shall do. Saul was anointed king. He pours the oil. Samuel pours the oil on Saul's head, and then he says, look, you may be questioning whether or not we've got the right guy. Here's how you're going to know we've got the right guy. You're going to leave here. You're going to go there. You're going to see 2 guys. They're going to tell you that your dad's worried about you and not the donkeys anymore. You're going to leave them. You're going to go a little farther. You're going to meet 3 guys. They're going to be carrying 3 loaves of bread, right? 3, what's the other thing? 3 young goats, right? And a skin of wine. They're going to give you 2 of the loaves of bread. Right, okay. And he's like, okay, this is a lot of information that I'm absorbing right now. He's like, you're going to go from there. You're going to go a little further. You're going to meet some prophets coming out of a place. They're going to have tambourines and lyres and flutes. By the way, thanks to Tambourine Today, Doc, high five. Right, they're going to have all of these things going on. And then the Holy Spirit is going to rush on you. The Spirit of God is going to rush on you, and you're going to prophesy with them. Saul's listening to all this like, okay, that's a lot of information. That's a lot of really specific things that have to happen for this anointing to happen, right? And just spoiler alert, like if you were to read the next section, that's exactly what happens. He goes, and all the things happen just as Samuel said they would happen, right? God was sending these confirmations to Saul that, yes, you're the guy. I know you have reservations. I know you have concerns. I know you may not think you're the guy, but yes, you're the guy. We didn't get the wrong guy. The lines weren't crossed. You are the man. So God called Saul to service. God put Samuel to call Saul into specific service to meet Samuel's shape, what Saul's shape, what Saul was made to do. And then God confirmed his purpose. God will confirm his purpose. Hey, Ezekiel or Isaac, good to see you. God will ultimately confirm his purpose in your life. And so if you've been called to teach, if God has put on you a call to teach, and someone says, hey, I'd like you to lead this Bible study or this thing, and you're like, oh, I don't know if you've got the right guy, and I think I do. And then you go and you teach, and immediately after you go and teach, someone's like, oh my goodness, that was a blessing. Like what you did, what you said, how you shared, like it spoke to my heart. All of a sudden, what you were seeking is being confirmed through someone else. God will confirm what he's called you to do. And so, like for me and my ministry, right, like I went and I began serving in youth ministry. That's often where you find yourself starting inside of the ministry world, because that's what all you know. You grew up in youth ministry, and so you move over into youth ministry. And I was a youth minister at Blanchard Baptist Church in Livingston, Texas. In fact, the search committee that came and called me to be your pastor a decade ago saw me preach at Blanchard Baptist Church, because my pastor there allowed me to go and preach a sermon. So they got like one dry run with me before I came here to do another one for you guys as a whole. And when I was at Blanchard Baptist Church, I was married. I'd been married for a couple years, and I remember my wife telling me, she said, I didn't know you could do that. Right, as far as like teaching and leading inside of a youth Bible study. She's like, I'm surprised, like not that she didn't think I had no capability, but like she's like, I didn't know you were that good at that. Right, that seems kind of like a backhanded compliment, but it was a genuine compliment where she was confirming in me, like, you're able to do that. Like you have an ability to do something. And I want to say, it's like as you seek to figure out what it is that you're supposed to be doing in God's purpose, like what God has purposed you to do for his kingdom, right? And how you've been made, as you try things out, you'll realize real quick, like I'm not supposed to do this because no one tells me I'm good at this. But I might be supposed to do this because every time I do this, like it seems like things go well. I've confessed many, many times I'm not supposed to be working with young children. I love that you have children. I'm so grateful that you have kids. I have plenty myself, and that is all the Lord wants me to deal with on a regular basis. There are some people just great with them. My bride, wonderful with them. She gets the understanding thing. Leslie Hasselbach, tremendous with them. It's just in her, calls out of her. She can't change that. It's part of who she is, the way she can engage and interact with them. Like it's how God made them to be. And to do something else would be like abusing, like not serving God in the way in which you're called to serve. Guys, God calls you to greater service, and he will confirm that call just as he did for Saul. I mean, maybe not like with people with goats and whatnot, but other people will help to confirm that call. You will find as you set your hand to the plow that there's a harvest that's reaped that you were not expecting otherwise. And so all of these things happen. Saul finally makes it home, tells his uncle kind of about all these things except for the whole I'm going to be king thing. Samuel gathers everyone at Mizpah to find the king. So he's already anointed Saul to be the king, but he's going to have a service to find the king. And so they have a situation where they draw or cast lots. And that basically means they got a jar, and they put all the names of the tribes in the jar. And then they would shake it around, and whichever one fell out first, that was the one that God had providentially chosen to be where the king was from. And so Samuel puts all the tribes in there, shakes around, and the tribe of Benjamin falls out of the jar. Right? And then he takes all of the families in Benjamin, and he puts them in the jar, and he shakes it around, and sure enough, it was Saul's clan, the Machrites, that were taken from that. And then he takes all the families inside of that clan, and he shakes them around, and then the family of Kish falls out, which is Saul's father. And then shakes it around. All the children of Kish are now in there. Saul is taken from that. And so through a series of divine acts, God, before the gathered people, says, this man will be your king. And then they say, go get the king. And so they're going to go bring Saul out, and they're going to proclaim him to be king. And he's missing. He should be there. He should have been in the crowd of people. In fact, since he had already had the confirmation of his thing, he should have been standing really close to Samuel. Just like right here, I'm waiting for this thing to happen. But no, he had other plans. He was still scared and reluctant. And so pick up in verse 22. It says, "So after he could not be found, they inquired again of the Lord." They said, "Is there a man still to come?" Basically saying, did we get it wrong? Because he's not here. Saul isn't here. Is there another man yet to come? And the Lord said, "Behold, he has hidden himself among the baggage." Just hiding among the luggage. And so they ran and they took him from there. And when he stood among the people, he was taller than any of the people from his shoulders upward. And Samuel said to all the people, "Do you see him who the Lord has chosen? There is none like him among all the people." And the people shouted, "Long live the king." And they gave tribute to him. Some people had some issues with him, but that's kind of the way that chapter ends. Saul was hiding when he should have been moving forward. Guys, this is for you, this is what a lot of us do as well in ministry. In church work, in service, whatever it is that God is calling you to do in kingdom work. And God's like, "Hey, you're made to do this." And you kind of recognize this is what I'm really good at. And then someone says, "Hey, I think that this is something you should do." And you're like, "I don't know." And then God tells you over and over again, "This is what you should do. This is what you should do. This is what you do." And all the time, you're like, "Ooh, I don't know. I'm not comfortable with that. I don't know if I'm worthy of that." This idea of worthiness, by the way, you're not worthy of that. Well, it's a beautiful thing that God takes unworthy people and calls them to service. It's a beautiful thing. If only worthy people were allowed to teach or preach, none of us would ever stand in that position. Right? It's not that you're worthy, right? But if God has made you to do something and you choose not to do it, that's not modesty. But there's this idea of humility, someone else, and this false humility. If God has called you to do something and you reluctantly don't do it, that's sin. That's sin. That's not modesty. That's not a virtue to be praised. When Saul was hiding in the baggage, when he was reluctant to do what God had told him to do, that reluctancy is not humility. That reluctancy is disobedience. And if God has called you, if he's made you to do something, and he has made you specifically to fill a role in his kingdom, and if he has called you out and there's been confirmation in there and you know that that's what you're supposed to do, whether it's teaching or giving or serving or whatever your fit is in God's kingdom, whether it's in this church or in the broader world of missions that we have, and you choose not to do it because you think someone else should be stepping into that role, that is not humility. That's sin. Reluctancy is not humility. Saul began his leadership as a sinful man. Instead of stepping into the position that God had confirmed to him through a series of very strange, miraculous happenings, he's like, "I don't want to be anywhere around this. Anyone but me." And you may be here today and you may be struggling with that anyone but me idea. I want you to know, if it's you, it's you. And don't look for anyone else to take it from you. When Seth's up here asking someone to host the high school guys for the Disciple Now weekend, and you're like, "Yeah, that's supposed to be me," every time he says it, "Yeah, we can host them, we should host them." But then you're like, "Well, but someone else could probably do it better." Well, wait another week. Maybe someone else. That reluctancy is not righteous. That's wrong. You're delaying what it is that God is calling you to do, God's leading you to do. Reluctancy in that area is sinful. And so I'm going to ask you to stop being disobedient, not in that area specifically, though, yes, if you feel led to host the high school guys, go host them for sure. But in any area that God has called you to be, stop trying to push other people up. I've seen so many people do that. God has called them to something, and then they're constantly grabbing other people and shoving them into the hole that they're supposed to be filling. Because they're scared to fill it. They don't want the responsibility. They don't want people looking at them. They don't want the eyes. They don't want the attention. I understand. But if God has made you, shaped you, given you skills and abilities and passions and spiritual gifts to do something, and he's called you to do that, and it's been confirmed through whenever you've actually toed around in it that you're successful at it, stop Stop pushing other people into a position you're the one meant to fill. Right? Allow other people to fill their positions instead of them having to fill yours. Sometimes I'll walk around my house and there's stuff on the ground like Legos or something, and I will pick them up with my feet and move them to my hand. Okay? Right? Because leaning down is hard work. But truthfully, the hand is made for grabbing, and my feet aren't the best at it. And a lot of times in the church, we have a lot of feet pretending to be hands because we have hands in the pockets instead of serving where they're supposed to be. And you're making people who should be doing something else fill your role because you're unwilling to do it. And it doesn't work as well. Like, the Lego eventually gets up, and in fact, if I hop across the house, I could probably even put it in the bin that it's supposed to be in, but it's a really ineffective way to accomplish the task. And I feel like in the church we have that a lot. We have a lot of real inefficient ways. But guys, God is doing things now. And it's not an accident that you've experienced what you've experienced in your life. It's not an accident that you've had the life that you've had to lead you to this point. Those experiences, those spiritual gifts, those passions shape you to be the person you are for His kingdom. If you're a child of God, that is what you're called to do, is to fill the roles that God has placed before you that only you can fill. And it's not an accident that you fell into those spots. And sometimes we think it is. Well, like, it's just coincidental that I'm here. It's coincidental that they're talking about this. There's no coincidences in God's kingdom. I read a really interesting story. I'll share it today. This was published in Reader's Digest in the 1940s after World War II. And there was a man who had been conscripted to go to serve in the war. He was Hungarian. And so he was conscripted to go serve in the war and then eventually he got tasked with burying by the Russians who eventually got hold of him, I guess. And basically he was just burying German soldiers the entirety of his time in the war. His name was Bela Peshki. And Bela eventually made his way back to Hungary after the war was done, went to his parents' apartment. They were gone. Strangers were living in the apartment. It had been a couple of years since he had been there. He goes to his apartment. His wife is gone. Finally meets up with some friends who had found their way back there as well, and they share the story of what had happened in that town, that his family, his parents, and his wife had been rounded up by the Nazis, and they had been taken to Auschwitz, presumed dead in the gas chambers there. And so he did whatever he could do to get out of Hungary. It's a place of death and despair, and so he went to Paris, eventually found his way to New York City. And one day he's riding the subway, going about his normal day, trying to integrate into this new town of New York City. He's sitting on the subway reading the Hungarian newspaper. Then a man named Marcel gets on that train, a train that he never got on, but he had gone in earlier that day to go to visit someone in the hospital. So he was on a different subway than he ever rode before. And he was Hungarian as well, and he looks over, and the seat beside Bela opens up, and he looks over and he sees this man reading a Hungarian newspaper, and he speaks Hungarian, and so for the first time in years probably, he speaks to someone on the subway in New York City. And he speaks in Hungarian to Bela, and Bela realizes he's got a fellow Hungarian here with him, and so he begins to share his story of what led him to being in New York City, the tragedy that befell his family, and how he was just trying to get his life together. And as he continued to share the story of what was going on in his life, Marcel began to get more and more interested in his story. And he said, as Bela shared about his wife being missing and dead, Marcel said, Bela, was your wife's name Maria? And Bela says, yes. And he says, we need to get off the subway. And earlier that week, he had met a woman named Maria who shared her life story, and it sounded very, very similar to the back end of Bela's life story. And she had been taken to Auschwitz, but she had been transferred from there to an ammunition depot where she made bullets for the Nazis instead of dying in the camp. And when she went back home, her husband was missing, and so she ended up coming to America. She was in New York City in America. And this man, Marcel, had heard her story a week ago, and he had her phone number in his wallet because he was going to reach back out to her to try to get back together with her, with some other Hungarians. And so he called her up on the phone, and he dialed the phone, and he asked her where she lived, what street she lived on, and she said the street name, and he asked Bella, he said, "Did you live on whatever the street name was?" And Bella said, "Yes." He handed him the phone. He said, "Bella, I have your wife on the phone." And Bella picked up the phone, went and found his wife, happily ever after, right? Right, Reader's Digest summarizes this at the end of the story. He says, some people, skeptics, will say this was a series of coincidences that led to this happenstance. This man happened to be on a train he's not supposed to be on. After meeting a woman that he wouldn't meet and speaking to someone that he never spoke to and having a seat next to him. But it seems far more likely that God was on the train before them. I want you to know God is on the track with you already. He's going before you. He's preparing you for these things. It is not just circumstances and happenstances that have led you to this place. It's not coincidences that led you to this time in your life. God has a purpose for your life. And guys, if we'll just get our eyes off it, we'll see that God is doing something. And you have a role to play in that. God has a plan just for you. A plan that no one else can do. Right? You have a part in God's kingdom just for you. How are you going to fill that role? Are you going to step out in faith and do that? Or are you going to sit back and try to push other people into it? Will you pretend as if God isn't sovereign and providentially working all these things out? Or you just walk in faith to what God has called you to do? And spoiler alert, you may step out in faith and find out that was the wrong place to go. You may realize real quick that you were not meant for that. Your shape was slightly different. You need to be in a different place in God's puzzle, but you need to step in faith today. Guys, I want you to know God has called you here today to call you to step out in faith. You may be here today and you don't know Jesus Christ, your Savior and Lord. I want you to know God desires you to be his child. He sent his son to die on the cross so the sins of the world would be paid, so that your sins would be covered through the blood of Jesus Christ. What do you need to do? You need to realize that God has called you to salvation today. That is step one for you. Will you step out in faith? If you already know Christ today, what's God calling you to do? God is still calling people to missions, full-time missions. God's still calling people to full-time Christian service. But God's also calling people to be faithful inside of their workplaces and inside of their churches and inside of their communities to serve him as the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. And this church needs you to do that. Maybe you want to join our church to put your hands alongside of ours. Guys, we'd love to have more hands, but we need hands to work in the way that only you can work. We're going to have an invitation. I pray that you come. But stop living outside of God's plan. God has a plan for you. God has a plan just for you. Walk in faith today. Let me pray.